Next on News Talk, AM 1480 WLEA, the Newsmaker Show with Kevin Doran.
Brian O'Neill in for Kevin Doran today on in segment one with Alfred University Professor of Political Science, Dr. Robert Heineman, and his former student, Congressman Tom Reed, an Alfred University graduate. Congressman, thanks for joining us today.
Well, great to be with you, Brian, and as well with Dr. Heineman, my old constitutional law professor.
Thank you much, guys.
The big story in the national news this week is that President Obama got Sergeant Bo Bergdahl out of Afghanistan, where the sergeant had been for 5 years held there. It was a prisoner swap. The U.S. released 5 Taliban prisoners from Gitmo in exchange for getting Sergeant Bergdahl back. Now, Bergdahl's release comes with some controversy. Bergdahl was accused of his fellow soldiers of being a deserter. Some soldiers were sent out in 2009 to find Bergdahl. 6 of those soldiers killed in attempting to find Bergdahl. Fox News interviewed soldiers who were stationed with him. They said after Bergdahl deserted, now that's their words, not mine, after he deserted, that the attacks on their base increased, the implication being that Bergdahl could have been responsible for that. This is a soldier who served with Bergdahl talking to Brian Kilmeade on Fox.
Then we understand, according to one report, that attacks picked up right after he disappeared. They were remarkably accurate on the base. Did you actually experience the same thing?
Yes, sir. And that was one of the that was one of the telltale signs for me, is that whenever he went and walked off the base, only stuff that that we know, that we train for, that the spots that we know on vehicles, how our movements are and stuff like that. They were getting hit with very precisely, and the ambushes we used, the certain tactics that we used, the Taliban was picking up on those things.
This is Bergdahl's squad leader on with Megyn Kelly on Fox about what he heard on a military radio about a U.S. soldier after Bergdahl was not seen, about a U.S. soldier trying to find someone to talk to in the Taliban.
We heard over the radio chatter that there was an American looking for someone who spoke English so he could talk to the Taliban. I heard that right over the radio and right from the interpreter's lips when he said it. And that alarmed everybody. We knew at that point he had already walked away, but now we knew that he was attempting to contact the Taliban on his own accord.
Congressman Reed, this view of Sergeant Bergdahl is a little bit different than the official story we originally heard.
Well, I'll tell you, as more information comes out, and we're learning just as much information as everyone else is, because the president did not communicate with us, did not reach out to Congress and work with Congress on this situation. And these are very concerning data points and facts that need to be investigated to see exactly what we're dealing with here. First, and I continue to believe that having American soldier return with his family, obviously, we're all supportive of that. But if there's serious questions that need to be answered about the background of the case, that's what we need to get into the bottom of. And it would have been much better, in my opinion, had the president even reached out to the key folks on the intelligence committees as well as the defense committees, so that at least there was communication going back and forth as to these issues.
Bill O'Reilly on the Fox News channel has the following words about why the president saved Bergdahl. O'Reilly says he's been told by a Washington insider that the president is now apathetic in his second term and is just not worried about doing things that could come across as, well, unpopular.
It's almost beyond belief that an administration could be this dense. So last night I talked with someone who knows the inside story of the Obama White House. I have to keep the person's identity secret, but he told me that the president has come to the conclusion that his administration is not going to accomplish its goals. According to this guy, the president has concluded that public opinion really doesn't matter anymore.
Dr. Heineman, your political science thoughts on what O'Reilly said there?
Well, I'm not so certain O'Reilly's correct on that. I do agree with Congressman Reed that he absolutely should have notified or talked to Congress about this, and as the rest of the material comes out, obviously he's got some people he can at least say, well, look, I talked to people in Congress who are working together on this. My view of the thing is, and I think the General of the Army has already said that we're going to look into this more deeply. I think they may well bring the guy up on charges. which is fine. But my view is we got rid of 5 people in Gitmo. We got them out of there, and probably the next time we run into these guys, we'll deal with them a little more harshly than we did before.
Congressman Reed.
Well, I have said before, as I've dealt with this White House down in Washington, D.C., I'm very concerned how disengaged the president seems to be on the issues. And I don't know if that's a second-term itch or something of that nature, but this, I think we're starting to see a president that maybe got into the position with not as much experience as he could have probably brought a different perspective to the office. And we're seeing it on all fronts. We're seeing it in the VA situation. We've seen it in the IRS situation. And to me, this is just another example of a White House that it really is kind of disengaged and not leading, but rather trying to let the staff and politics kind of control the day.
On the VA scandal, Alabama Republican Congressman Jeff Miller says the House on Monday will go after the VA legally if the House does not get documents soon.
If they don't provide everything by Monday, when Congress goes back into session in the House, then we're going to go ahead and petition the federal court to make the Department of Veterans Affairs comply with the subpoena.
Why do you think you need that information so badly?
Because they haven't been telling the truth all along. I mean, there was a list, there was a secret list. It was destroyed. We want to know who destroyed it, what names were on the list, who authorized the destruction, and probably one of the important questions is, when was that list destroyed? Because at the very same hearing that broke this all open on April the 9th, I asked for a preservation order that basically said you will destroy nothing. And now it appears that they were destroying records in an attempt to get around the preservation order that Congress had ordered.
Congressman Reed.
I can't agree with the chairman more on that point. When we first heard of this situation, I can just tell you I was appalled. This is unacceptable in the VA to have a potential secret list that's being maintained where potentially up to 40 U.S. veterans died as a result of that manipulation. Not only is that wrong, I truly believe there's criminal activity here. That's why I asked the Attorney General to investigate this. In particular, Director Heineman out in the Phoenix VA Center where a lot of this originated. I did support the resignation of Shinseki, but at the same time, we can't lose sight of the people that engaged in the bad action, and they need to be held criminally responsible for the acts they've engaged in, and that's where we need to get to the bottom of the Phoenix as well as the entire system where this shenanigans was occurring.
Dr. Heineman, a Washington Post ABC poll showed that 97% of Americans thought this was a serious problem, that VA stalled doing medical appointments and then covered it up. Now, the left, as you know, Dr. Heineman, back in the 1980s used to call President Reagan the Teflon president, meaning nothing stuck to him scandal-wise. Will the VA scandal and the Bergdahl story be something that stays around for a while, or do people distance the president from these scandals?
Well, I think Congressman Reed is correct. Simply asking Shinseki to step down really doesn't do the job. The point is the lower echelons have to be held accountable, and that has to send a message to the IRS, HHS, and all the other agencies at the federal level that, look, you can't do this sort of thing. You're going to have to be held responsible at the lower levels because these guys at the top, it's all they can do from day to day to keep things moving in a halfway decent direction. So I think Congressman Reed is absolutely correct. We have to follow up on the lower echelon people. Now, the point about Obama being the Teflon president, I don't think. I think this is hurting him. I think it's hurting him very badly, and I think he knows it. And unfortunately, and Congressman Reed listed off a number of scandals there. Again, disclosing the name of the CIA chief of station in Afghanistan inadvertently. I mean, how inept can you get? To say it's not Obama's fault, unfortunately it is.
Congressman Reed, any final thoughts before we go here in segment one?
As we deal with the VA situation, I got to stress, I am so concerned about this and appalled by it. And I just want to make sure that everyone knows out there that we reached out immediately to the Bath VA, the surrounding VAs, to the district, Buffalo, Syracuse, Canada, Wayne, Erie, Pennsylvania, that service so many of our vets, and we're holding them accountable. We haven't picked up on any type of shenanigans like that has been reported, but when it comes to the veterans, we need to stand with the vets, not only when they're deployed, but most importantly when they come home and to the end, and that's where we're going to make sure that in our local area, we did the trust but verify. We're going to make sure that the vets get what they earn, and those are the benefits that they deserve.
Congressman Reed, thanks for joining us here in segment 1.
Thanks so much, guys. Good talking with you.
Good to talk to you.
Dr. Heineman will be back with us in segment 2 in just a moment. I'm Brian O'Neill filling in for Kevin Doran on the Newsmaker Show here on AM 1480 WLEA. It's Brian O'Neill on the Newsmaker Show on AM 1480 WLEA. On the line now with Dr. Robert Heineman. On to state issues, State Republican Chairman Ed Cox says Governor Andrew Cuomo should be tried for bribery because Cuomo made a political promise, and that was reported by the liberal media. Cuomo made a political promise to the Working Families Party that he would work to oust Republicans from the state Senate in the November elections in exchange for getting the Working Family Party endorsement. Republican candidate for governor Rob Astorino echoes Ed Cox's statements. This is Astorino appearing on the Fred Dicker Show on Talk 1300.
Prior to the convention, and he was forced on tape to make statements and promises in exchange for their endorsement. I mean, I don't know how that doesn't potentially fit into the New York State bribery laws. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know. I know it smells. I know it stinks. I know it's exactly what's wrong with this state.
Dr. Heineman, is that a realistic scenario that Governor Cuomo could ever be charged with bribery?
No, not for that, I think. Now, in terms of bribery, I think there are other things that Mr. Cuomo's been involved with that come a lot closer to using state money and his money in perhaps illegal ways. But this is simply politics, and as Mr. Astorino says, it does smell. Yeah.
Hornell Mayor and Steuben County Democratic Chairman Sean Hogan says the far left has turned against Cuomo because Cuomo is too fiscally conservative. Would you agree with Hogan on that?
Yeah, no, I think Mayor Hogan's correct on that. The far left is very unhappy with Cuomo. Cuomo is trying desperately to establish himself as a moderate, progressive governor, and I think he's basically concerned about trying to position himself as a potential candidate for the presidency. And in New York State, with de Blasio and all these other leftist, often very well organized groups, that is definitely going to make them unhappy, and I think that's why, frankly, he had to negotiate. He basically had to sell himself out to the working families line to prevent someone from, in fact, running on that line other than himself. So, yes, I think Mayor Hogan's correct. Cuomo is going to have to do a little more dancing here, I think.
The Buffalo News called out Governor Cuomo for referring to ultra-conservatives as running the state Republican Party, and then the Buffalo News says the governor turns around a day or two later and appears with the GOP in Rochester with Senator Robach, and Cuomo stood with Robach and said, "We've reversed gridlock in Albany." Is the governor trying to play both sides?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, this is the governor who, I think here a few months ago, simply said that there was no room in New York State for conservatives and the so-called ultra-conservatives. So the idea that he can decide who's conservative, who belongs in New York State, and who doesn't, seems to me is kind of distasteful. But appearing with Senator Robach, whom I know, is kind of interesting because now apparently I'd say he's probably a sworn enemy of people like Senator Robach, since he sold out to the working families line and has guaranteed him he's going to do everything he can to defeat Republican candidates. So this will be interesting. This has all the potential for a real kind of blowback on the governor and the Democrats generally, perhaps.
The state Senate Democrats want a minimum wage increase. Senate Republicans argue that those jobs are more for young high school and college-age students, that those jobs are not intended to raise a family and buy a house with and buy a car with, that the minimum wage increase will just cause companies to lay off the high school and college-age students that are working in those places. Your views on that minimum wage issue, Dr. Heineman?
Well, that's absolutely correct. The idea of a working wage, I think, is important, but the fact is it will hurt young people very dramatically, and it's unfortunate. And obviously the unions want the minimum wage as high as they can get it because that simply puts a floor under the requests they can make for their union members. But at a certain point, it has, and the problem is these young people, if they can't get jobs, if they can't get part-time work here or there, or maybe an entry-level job, then what are they going to do? Well, maybe they'll leave the state, or maybe they'll find other endeavors that's not nearly as constructive as holding a working job.
Dr. Heineman, medical marijuana, that's said to be passing, they say that Newsday says that there's going to be an agreement on that before the week is up. Your thoughts on medical marijuana? It seems that some Republicans, even like Senator O'Mara, have changed their views on this. Your thoughts on the medical marijuana passing in New York State? Yeah, well, I think it will pass. I think, again, it's a question of how you phrase these things and pose the issue. So again, it's not global warming anymore. It's climate change. It's not making pot legal. It's medical marijuana. Now, I don't have any problem with that in terms of my question is how is it basically dispensed? Does it have to have a doctor's prescription? What kind of limits are on it? Some of these people, of course, are very, very ill, and if we can do something to make their situation more bearable, I think most people are generous and agree with that. But I do think that in the state of Washington and the state of Colorado, where you have recreational marijuana easily available, the results of this are going to be horrendous. Dr. Robert Heineman, want to thank you very much for joining us this week.
Oh, thank you much for having me, Brian. Have a good weekend.
All righty, Dr. Heineman. And before that, it was Congressman Tom Reed along with Dr. Robert Heineman, Brian O'Neill filling in for Kevin Doran, who the doctor almost called me this morning. It's AM 1480 WLEA, Hornell, New York. NBC News is next.